Welcome to the Garden Angelists, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma.
And I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana. Good morning, Dee.
Good morning, Carol. We got a lot to talk about today, girl.
We do. We are very excited because it's October.
Yes, and October means cooler temperatures, we hope, soon.
Not here, but we're not talking about the weather.
Okay, we'll stop.
We're talking about October. Time to get out your sweaters.
How are you going to wear sweaters if it's hot?
Well, you could get them out. I didn't say wear them. Sweatshirts.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So you have a quote for us.
I do. It's actually a little poem.
Well, it's part of a poem. It's the first stanza of a poem.
Here we go. October is the treasurer of the year, and all the months pay bounty to her store. The fields and orchards still their tribute bear, and fill her brimming coffers more and more. But she, with youthful lavishness, spends all her wealth in gaudy dress, and decks herself in garments bold of scarlet, purple, red, and gold. By Paul Laurence Dunbar, and he is an American poet, novelist, and playwright from the late 19th and early 20th century.
Yes, and he was African American, and he passed away like in 1901. What a wonderful, I'm absorbing that quote. It is so beautiful.
It is. And I'm starting to see some fall color around here in the trees, just a tint, but enough to remind you that it is fall.
Well, I just got back from Yellowstone and I saw fall color up there, but we aren't going to talk about my Yellowstone trip, but it was wonderful.
We should do a travelogue this winter. We'll do a travelogue on your Yellowstone trip.
Yeah, we can do a travelogue on all the trips we took, and that would be fun. And we could talk about gardening travel and all kinds of travel and what to do. But today we're going to talk about, your talk you did. You did something new in your talk.
Well, I did a singing debut at my last talk.
I didn't know you were much of a singer.
Dee, I can't sing at all. I'm one of those people in church that sings really quiet so nobody in front of her hears because it's really bad.
I know, because I go to church with you. We go to mass together when we're on garden trips, and you don't hardly sing at all.
I know, but I had a singing debut last weekend when I spoke to the Lake County Master Gardeners at their event, and it was called Rhapsody in Bloom. So,
how fun.
I had to come up with something, right?
Yeah, right. So how'd it go?
But, I thought it went pretty well, and they applauded me afterwards, after the song.
Are you sure they weren't applauding that you were finished?
Possibly. So maybe next week I will sing on the podcast. I will sing my song.
Okay, sounds good to me. I am not going to sing any songs on the podcast. No.
Okay, so remind me next week that I might want to sing my song. It's a fall song.
Oh, a fall song. I like it. So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about bulbs.
Flower bulbs.
Yes, we're talking about flower bulbs, not light bulbs. We're talking about flower bulbs, and we're going to talk especially about those that aren't eaten as much by deer and other critters.
Yes. But we also have in our dirt a solution for some of the things people like to grow that are eaten by critters.
Yes. Well, that's a nice teaser, Dee.
I thought so. I thought it was a good one. So what bulb do you think evokes spring? And here's a hint. Critters love it. Voles.
Well,
deer.
I think what you want me to say is tulips.
Yeah, but there's another bulb too. I did want you to say tulips. But there's another one we really love that, oh gosh, it's a great early pollinator source, but
crocuses.
Yes, crocuses. Poor little crocuses. Crocuses are wonderful, and they're great for early pollinators. Like fruit trees are good for early pollinators, but unfortunately, they're also great deer candy, vole candy, et cetera, et cetera. But we have some other ideas. So we'll talk a little more about those later in the podcast. But we're going to talk now about different bulbs that don't get eaten so easily. I sound like I don't even know what I'm talking about, and I do.
You do. We have a whole list of bulbs that you could plant, and, because people come up with all kinds of techniques, and we're going to give them a really easy technique to avoid critter damage on their bulbs when they plant them. But one thing we want to say before we get headlong into all these flowers and get all googly-eyed and start ordering a bunch more bulbs, which we'll probably do.
Yeah.
It's too early to plant bulbs. Even though you see them in the stores right now, it is too early. The soil has to be much cooler.
Right.
Down in the 50 to 60 range. And I'm still having temperatures in the upper 80s. And so I think one of the things to tell people is if you need to wear gloves to keep your hands warm, it's time to plant bulbs.
In other words, if it's the most miserable day you can think of in the fall, that's a good day to plant bulbs. If it's windy and chilly and you need a coat and you need socks and boots and your hands are cold and you're thinking, why did I order all these bulbs? That's the day.
Exactly. And sometimes, I sometimes just say, hey, it's Halloween. I think I'll plant bulbs on Halloween.
And I usually do it around Thanksgiving. And people are really surprised by that. But the reason we're talking about bulbs now is because this is when you order them. This is when you buy them in the store. And then you store them someplace where the critters won't get them. And you also store them someplace that's cool. So in my case, I don't really store them in the refrigerator unless I'm going to force them indoors. But I just store them someplace cool, like the dog run between my house and the garage, in their box. And right now, mice and stuff aren't so bad about getting into bulbs. But, in the winter, they're much worse. But we can talk about that later, too. So buy bulbs now, but plant them later. Around Halloween, if you live up around the Indianapolis area. Around Thanksgiving, if you live near where I live in Oklahoma. So, and in Texas, gosh, I'd probably wait until December in northern Texas, but I wouldn't, you have to buy pre-chilled bulbs in southern Texas.
Yeah, and I don't have to buy pre-chilled bulbs. And I tell you, now is a good time to shop, but there's starting to be some sold out signs on some of these bulbs on the internet because there are people like me who actually ordered her bulbs in the spring and then added to the order, and then added to the order again, and then forgot about it. And today I got a notice that UPS will be delivering a 14-pound box of bulbs to my doorstep tomorrow.
How many bulbs do you think that is?
14 pounds, Dee.
It's a lot. That's a lot of bulbs, but I can't say anything because I ordered 400 tulips from Color Blends. And then yesterday when I put together this list, I ordered some other bulbs that are not tulips, and because then I ordered critter-resistant bulbs. And here, one thing we should say about if you order bulbs online from someplace like Van Engelen, or if you order something from Britt and Becky's, somewhere like that, you'll get them in staggered shipments. So your 14 pounds is just from one company, right?
Correct.
Right. So if you order from more than one company, which some people do, then you're going to get more than one shipment. I'm going to get more than one shipment because also the way they set up those shipments is they ship to everybody way north first. And then they just keep yours in reserve and then they eventually ship them to you the further south you are. So complicated.
Yes. So anyway, my bulbs are coming, but I will keep them in a cool location because I'm not planting them for another month.
And I won't plant mine until November. And I hope I don't get mine usually I get mine at the very end of October, but I don't plant them until November. All right, so I got this list of critter-resistant bulbs from Van Engelen. And some of these do not work well in my garden or Carol's garden. And then we'll tell you which ones work well in her garden versus my garden, which there's quite a bit of difference, actually.
Right.
So we're going to start with alliums. Do you plant alliums?
I plant tons of alliums. They do great in my garden here in the Midwest.
Okay, I love alliums, and occasionally I will go and plant them, but they're pretty pricey bulbs. And some years they do not make it past one summer. Some years they make it 2 or 3 summers before they peter out. The reason for that is, I think, we have this really long hot summer, and I think it's just too much for them and they rot. So that's my guess.
Right. And the alliums, surprisingly, they actually, there's some that bloom later. I have them still blooming in July in some places in the garden. So there's a whole range of them, and they are critter resistant, and I recommend them.
Right. And they're part of the Amaryllidaceae family, which is the amaryllis family.
And you know what some people do? And I think our friend Elizabeth up in Buffalo, New York, some people will take the dried flower head because it sort of dries straw-like,
Yeah,
and they'll spray paint that a bright color. And then it's like a accent in the garden because they do they're tall, they stick up.
They look like sparklers.
Yes. And there's actually a variety, I think, called sparklers that is really like that.
Mm-hmm. And I've had better luck with some alliums than others. Okay, on to our next one, Camassia. I do not grow it. And the reason I do not grow it, it is native to the Pacific Northwest. Is in Oklahoma anything like the Pacific Northwest? Heck no.
I do grow them.
Yes.
I first saw these at the Chicago Botanical Garden back in, I think, 2010. Love them, had not seen them before. So I have some planted. They come up and they like a wet area, is my experience.
And there's no such thing in my garden. Okay, next.
Corydalis. I planted Corydalis. I planted it as a plant year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Came up this spring. It's a lovely little, I'll call it almost an ephemeral because it comes up. It has beautiful little pink blooms. Mine had pink blooms and then it dies back. So, but I bought it as a plant, not a bulb.
I have never grown it, so I can't say anything about it. Okay, so the next one I pronounce Chionodoxa, and you pronounce it
Chionodoxa.
And you're probably right, and I'm probably wrong, but I don't know. It's Glory of the Snow. Yes, I grow these. I love them. I think they're beautiful.
Yes, I grow them too. There's blue ones, there's pink ones, there's white ones. And this is one that I'm trying to get to naturalize in my lawn. So I believe my 14 pounds of bulbs includes about 500 more Chionodoxa bulbs to plant.
Because they're listeners, they're really small bulbs and they're easy to plant and they only take a few minutes. I have them growing in this very sandy border behind my garage, and I also grow a little bit in the front, in my front borders. I will say this, sometimes they'll multiply and then sometimes they just go away. And so, but here's the thing, they're really cute and they're really early, and cute and early is very important in my garden because I get really bummed out in February.
Right. And I found that the blue Chionodoxa tend to multiply a little bit more than the white and the pink.
I agree. Dutch iris. Okay, so when I'm talking about Dutch iris, I'm talking about the really strappy-leaved iris that have very simple forms. I'm not talking about Iris reticulata, which is the short one. I have some bulbs of these in my garden that have lasted for years and years and years, but some years they bloom and some years they don't. They are blue and yellow, but when they do bloom, oh my gosh, they are so pretty.
They are pretty, and I also have some Dutch iris. Love them. I have tons and tons of Iris reticulata because there's very little else that blooms as early as Iris reticulata. I love them.
Yeah, I would say Scilla iberica is probably the only thing that blooms before my Iris reticulata. But Iris reticulata, again, sometimes they'll do fine for several years and sometimes they just don't come back. But you know what? They're not very expensive, and sometimes you can find them at the store, at the box store.
Right.
And there's lots of different varieties. I am especially fond of, is it Catherine Hodgkin?
Catherine Hodgkin is a great one. And
oh my gosh, I love that one.
Lady Beatrix Stanley is also a beautiful one.
Haven't seen that one.
And Claret.
Do you have some of those that we can get pictures of for the Instagram?
I absolutely do. And we will show pictures
Great.
on Instagram of Claret and Lady Beatrix Stanley.
Neato. And I think I've got some of Catherine Hodgkin and one of the purple ones. The next one is Aranthus hyemalis, which is winter aconite. I love these.
I love these too. Love. Beautiful yellow flower, kind of a bright yellow. Very early. One of the first flowers to bloom in my garden, sometimes in February.
I agree. They bloom here sometimes in February too. They are so early that I have to make sure I have all the leaves off of them so that they do bloom. But I know where I've planted them. And so I get them off of that area very early. That's why they're called winter aconite. The other thing I was going to say is they're sulfur yellow and they have a really pretty leaf shape and they're very, very short, very close to the ground. Great. If I'm remembering this right, great bee plant. I'm almost sure they are.
Yeah, and I would say regarding them that the more you plant, the happier you will be. And they're great for naturalizing. If you have sort of a wild area, winter aconite do really well.
And I ordered 150 more yesterday. They're tiny.
You're very bad, Dee.
I am very bad. Okay, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Aramuris, which is desert candles or foxtail lilies. I have a sad little story about that.
Oh, tell us the sad story.
When my tiered borders were brand new, I wanted to grow these there because I thought they'd make a great vertical accent. They are beautiful, but they are hard as heck to plant because they have a very spidery root system and you can't get them too deep. And oh my gosh, they were just so hard to plant. I got them planted. They lasted 1 year. They never came back. So that's my story, my sad little story about desert candles. I will never, ever plant them again.
So nobody has time for fussy flowers, Dee. Nobody.
Nobody. Not these two girls, anyway.
No.
The next flower is not fussy.
It's native.
It is native. You tell.
Oh, because erythronium. You wanted me to pronounce erythronium, which is...
I did.
Which is trout lily, which isn't a lily at all, but it's a trout lily. And I think it's called trout lily because the leaves sort of look like the flesh of trouts.
Right.
Great plant. It blooms around mid-spring around here. Yellow blooms. I really like it.
It's a great plant. I grow it too.
And it would be good. And this is one that's good in a woodland type setting. This is not put it out in the blazing sun. And if it finds a happy spot, sort of mine's in dappled shade around a tree, it'll keep coming back every year.
Right. Not hard to grow. The next one is fritillaria. Fritillaria. Oh my. Okay, so there's several different varieties of fritillaria from the snake's head type, which is really attractive, but hard to see in the landscape unless you have white ones. They come in purple and white. And then there's the crown imperial type ones that are orange or yellow. I have never, ever been able to get to grow these successfully. They do like a shaded area. I think they like some moisture. Apparently not enough moisture here, or it's too hot in the summer. But here's the other deal. The reason they're not eaten by anything is they smell like a skunk.
So I don't have those, Dee, and I'm not going to grow them. Thanks for the...
You aren't going to grow the skunk-like plants?
So the only endorsement we have for these is they smell like a skunk. So if you have deer problems, they won't eat them.
No, they will not touch them.
Okay.
And then there's galanthus, which, oh my gosh, galanthus. Galanthus are such a big deal in England that they have whole societies devoted to galanthus. And people who love galanthus are called galanthophiles. And they have whole galanthus tours, and they naturalize beautifully in England. In Oklahoma, no, they do not. And they're tiny, tiny, tiny. So grow something easier. And we have something easier on down.
But in Carol's neck of the woods, I can grow galanthus, and we should say the common name is snowdrops. I don't get the big drifts like they get in England. I get what I call puddles, but puddles. They grow and they come up early. So I like them. And I have an image for our listeners. So the galanthophiles, they have all these different varieties of galanthus.
Right.
Which you almost need a microscope to tell the difference one from the other. Like one's got a little tiny green spot on the edge of the petals. And sometimes they kind of hang down so you can't see up in them. So I heard that they will tape a mirror to the bottom of a golf club so they can put the mirror under there to see without having to get down on your hands and knees, they can see underneath the flower. what's really going on.
Okay, well, listeners, you owe it to yourself to go do a search of this because, first of all, I never heard of the mirror idea, but I can see them doing that because it's the same way with hellebores. Often they lean down and you have to get on the ground and look straight up at them to see them. So I can understand wanting to do that with a snowdrop, but snowdrops they're something I've never seen in mass except for online. And I think one of our friends, Kathy Purdy up in New York, she grows snowdrops too and does pretty well with them.
Yes. And I think in the right conditions, they will kind of expand. And I have another story about them. When I was up in Michigan, in the Detroit area, speaking last spring, they were selling galanthus they had dug up from the old Ford estate up there. And
Neat.
They were trying to get rid of them basically because they had spread and they're not a native plant and they wanted to return the wooded area to more native plants. So she had big handfuls of them for sale kind of in the green. So I bought
right, which is how you want to buy them. You want to buy them in the green.
Well, you can buy
if you can.
Yeah, you can buy the bulbs right now. There's nothing wrong with buying the bulbs. But I bought them in the green and planted them, and I'm anxious to see if they come up next year.
I've heard that they spread better if you buy them in the green, but what do I know? I can't grow the darn things in Oklahoma. But speaking of something that does spread and readily, that's Hyacinthioides hispanica, which is the Spanish bluebell. I bought about 7 of those bulbs several years ago, and oh my gosh, they want to take over the world. And not only that, according to the Missouri Botanical Garden, they cross-pollinate with Spanish bluebells, which are Hyacinthioides non-scripta. And when they cross-pollinate, then they invade the world. Have you found that to be the same?
I do not have the Hyacinthioides non-scripta, the English bluebells. I do not have those, but I do find my Spanish bluebells want to take over the world where they're at. So I am very careful to deadhead them so that they can't self-sow, because I do think they self-sow a little bit.
Yeah.
And then don't be afraid to rip these out if they're getting out of their bounds.
Yeah. In fact, I take out chunks of them every year. I have them in 2 spots in my garden. And what I found is they really spread in the bed that is off of the garage, that border, because that area is very sandy and well drained. And by golly, they love it. So, and it's also kind of dry. So just keep that in mind. If you plant them in clay, they probably won't spread as much. At least that's been my experience. So they want to invade the world. I do not have the English bluebells. I only have the Spanish ones. They are a very pretty blue flower. I think they also come in pink and white, but who wants them in pink and white? You know, you want them in blue.
I have them in pink and white, I'll have you know, and blue. I have them in pink, white, and blue.
I still don't see the point.
So I do.
I still don't see the point. Because it's really hard to get blue and white flowers in your garden, but it's not hard to get pink and white ones. I mean, blue flowers, not pink and white.
I don't know, but it's nice. It makes a nice mixed border. So when you're pulling these out, the temptation would be to give them to other gardeners. But always, 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 when you give somebody something that is aggressive like this, make sure they understand what they're getting.
Right, because you don't want them cursing you later in life. That's not a good thing.
No.
Moving on to hyacinths, because we are really getting low on time. Hyacinths are like pretty soldiers. Carol has some called the chestnut flower. What are those?
Yeah, it's a double flowering pink, and it's an old fragrant variety from Old House Gardens. And they've come back reliably for several years, but it's really pretty. I highly recommend it.
And I highly recommend forcing hyacinths indoors because they give you some spring when it's still winter time. And I've written a bunch of posts on my blog. All you got to do is search forcing flowers and it'll come right up. The next one, do you pronounce it Iphion or Iphion?
I pronounce it star flowers.
It's Iphion uniflorum, spring star flowers. So I think they're beautiful.
I do too. They're kind of understated, a light, beautiful blue. I feel like it's one of those flowers that reflects the sky. And they will bring up some foliage in the fall, but they then come back in the spring with more foliage and bloom. I love them.
So our next one is Leucojum estaviv. I don't know how to pronounce that. We'll just say Leucojum, summer snowflake. So, in my opinion, it's the South's answer to galanthus since we can't grow those. It does bloom a little later here. It blooms in April in Oklahoma. These can also be rather aggressive, so check your state's invasive list just to make sure. But in my garden, they have not escaped. They just look really good. They make pretty areas.
They look good in my garden. They do tend to just show up in places. And so I'm very careful to dig them out where I don't want them. I have to laugh about you saying this is the answer to people who can't grow snowdrops. Dee, the snowdrop is literally 3 inches tall.
I know.
And the summer snowflake can get up to like 1.5 to 2 feet tall. So
go big.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home. Here's the deal. They're the same coloration. That's what I'm talking about. They're green and white.
There you go.
And galanthus are green and white. But you're right. They're literally inches tall versus 1.5 foot. But, go big or go home.
Right. Muscari, grape hyacinth is another cute little flower. These also will come up all over if you let them. And
yes.
I have grape hyacinths all over because I let them. I also have pink and white varieties, but the more common is the purple.
Yeah, same here. They do pretty well here. And then eventually they just die out, probably because I dig around them too much. Then we come to a huge class of bulbs that deer love to hate, as do voles.
Daffodils.
Daffodils, the Narcissi group. Oh my gosh, so many choices. I think, I think you could just buy so many different types, from the heirloom types all the way to the very modern types. And one of the best places to buy daffodils is from our good friends, Brent and Becky at Brent and Becky's Bulbs.
I would agree. And if you get so into daffodils, you can join the American Daffodil Society, and there you will find your kindred spirits.
And there are kindred spirits in the Narcissi class, just like there are the Galanthophiles. I wonder if those are Narcissophiles.
I don't know. Or
I don't know.
I don't know, Dee. We just made up a new word.
I like it.
The next deer-resistant flower may be tempting for people, but we're going to say it and then tell you never, ever, ever plant it. And that is Star of Bethlehem, Ornithogalum umbelletum.
Yes.
I butchered that name.
So, that's a hard name to do. So here's the thing. It's still sold all over the place by bulb companies. Do not buy it. Do not plant them.
Never.
They're invasive almost everywhere.
And here in Indiana, if you go up to a place called Rome City, which is the home of the famous Hoosier author Gene Stratton Porter, she had a cabin on the edge of Lake Sylvan, and she planted Star of Bethlehem, and that was in the early 1900s. 100 years later, they are still trying to remove the invasive Star of Bethlehem from those gardens. They literally have to hand dig areas and sift out the bulbs and the bulbils to try to clear it out. It's horrible.
Yeah, because it makes little tiny bulblets. And oh my gosh, then new ones come from every one of those. Just don't plant them. I usually get at least once or twice a year, I get a photo sent to me by a reader or a listener, and they say, oh, what is this pretty little star flower in my garden? I'm like, oh my gosh, please get it out of your garden. And I try to explain to them, but it is so pretty that people are still, seduced by them.
Yes.
Finally, we come to a beautiful, beautiful blue flower called Scilla siberica, Siberian squill. They are very diminutive. They are tiny, short little plants. They can also be invasive in some areas. Check your state. I don't think they're invasive here. I can't ever get them to overwinter more than 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I don't think they're invasive in Indiana. I think the only place I've seen them invasive is there's one county in Minnesota that I think had them in one wild area. So that's our list of bulbs that you could plant and not have them eaten away by the deer and the other critters.
So let's move on to veggies, shall we?
We shall.
Do you want to do the quote or you want me?
I'll do it.
Okay.
The goldenrod is yellow, the corn is turning brown, the trees in apple orchards with fruit are bending down, by Helen Hunt Jackson.
That's lovely. And it talks about goldenrod, which is one of my favorite pollinator plants, and also corn and fruit.
And that is exactly true about how my garden looks now. The corn is brown. I need to pull out the stalks. I need to pull out a lot of stuff because it's just been a weird summer and it's over it. But there are some things that are going to survive frost that I'm going to leave for a while. And in my garden, that would be beets and kale are the only thing left out there.
I need to go out and plant carrots, and I've grown parsnips before, but they take too long. I'm not patient enough for parsnips. Beets, I need to plant some kale. I'm probably not going to plant Brussels sprouts, although those would probably overwinter with cover. And I'll plant some spinach. And what happens here, which we've talked about a little bit before, is that sometimes if it's still warm outside, which it is here, and I keep waiting for it to cool off a little bit more before I plant lettuce and spinach. Here's the deal. Sometimes spinach won't come up and neither will kale until spring, which I know you think is crazy talk because in Indiana it would be covered by snow and they'd die, right?
Yeah, they'd be covered by, it wouldn't work here. But you could sow those inside and then transplant them out later once it cools down a little bit and still get a pretty decent harvest before the end.
And that's gonna be my suggestion about lettuce and spinach. If you want to grow it for fall and try to get a harvest, I would say sow it now inside under lights and get it up pretty big, and then watch the weather because we just never know what's going to happen. Because you may have to cover it, but then again you may not. And I like these hoop covers that I bought years ago for my early spring garden, and you can find them online, and they're plastic, but they have wire running through them, and then they're double plastic, and then you weight down the ends because we have a lot of wind in Oklahoma. Weight down the ends with rocks, and that can keep your crops, in pretty good shape if you have to cover. Right now it's too hot to really plant seeds outside.
I would agree. And so I probably won't get a lot of seeds planted outside. When I start to cover my garden, it will be with chopped up leaves and grass from the lawn to send it into winter.
Right. And I'm going to do that with a bunch of my beds too, including the cutting garden. The cutting garden I will cover up with leaves and some grass clippings and get it ready for next year. Because I'm going to do something different with it next year. I may turn it into a pollinator garden. I don't know.
We'll talk about that later. But now let's move on. Let's move on to our dirt, because we gave a big list of bulbs that people want to plant if they have deer problems. But, tulips are a favorite food, and crocuses, which are two of the most popular bulbs. So
right.
There is a way to sort of protect your bulbs. Tell us, Dee.
Okay, it's called Plant Skid, and I'm going to spell it for people, even though it's going to be in our show notes for these people that listen to it on iTunes. Plant Skid is spelled PLANTSKYDD, and I had never heard of Plant Skid, but Britt and Becky Heath told us that they use it on all of their bulbs that they plant in their ornamental gardens around their nursery. And it is actually Swedish. That word is Swedish for plant protection. And I think the reason that people don't know more about it, at least people I knew didn't know about it, is because of the name. I mean, it's kind of a hard name, and it doesn't really say bulb protectant or repellent. But we're going to tell you about it because we heard about it at GardenCom this year in Salt Lake City. It is a powder, but it also comes as a spray. And I'm going to coat my tulips in it this fall and let you guys know in spring how it did. You coat your tulips with it. You wet the powder, coat them, let them dry. I know this is another step to the whole bulb planting thing, but I think it's an important one. And then you're going to let them dry out, and then you plant them. And then it becomes very moisture resistant, which is a good thing. So you can also spray it on your plants when they emerge to stop deer and other animals from nibbling on them. I have a lot of trouble with voles on my tulips, and so that's where I'm going to do it. And also on my crocus. I didn't buy any more Crocus tomasiensis this year, but a lot of mine have been eaten by voles. So all of the ones I planted in my lawn were eaten by voles.
Well, and I haven't had too many problems with voles eating all my crocuses because I plant so many. But Plant Skid is a good tool to have in the tool shed, so to speak, to try to keep deer from eating those lovely bulbs. We'll put a link on the show notes.
Yeah, and also, didn't you hear that they do the same thing at Newfields when they plant bulbs for the spring show?
Yes, Newfields is the former Indianapolis Museum of Art here in Indianapolis, and they use plant skid when they're planting all their bulbs because they plant like 100,000 billion, and they want to make sure that all those 100,000 billion do not get eaten by deer and voles because that place is full of critters. So I know that they are doing the same. They're using plant skid by the gallons.
And everybody says that it really does work. It's not cheap, but you know what? Neither are bulbs. So if you want a good display, then I would say use it. And while we're talking about deer resistance, we have another piece of dirt.
Yes. You recently read a book by Karen Chapman called Deer Resistant Design. And I have not seen this yet. I don't tend to buy those because I don't have problems with deer, but you said it's very good.
Yeah, it is very good. It focuses on some different ideas instead of the usual, which is plant a deer fence in your garden, which deer fencing is not very attractive and it's extremely expensive. And so the approach that our friend Karen Chapman took was she went all over the United States and maybe outside of the United States. And she looked at different places and different gardens that had dealt effectively with deer. And even on the front of it, it says fence-free gardens that thrive despite deer. So I can attest to the fact that I have deer out here. I live out in the country. Deer are a huge problem. I do have a dog that helps ward off some of the deer, but I also use some of these same ideas. So these gardens are all over the United States. So you'll get a different idea for, say, if you have a Texas garden versus a northern garden. She went all over. And she has 10 plants in each garden that deer love to hate. So that's a lot of ideas.
Very good. And we'll put a link to that in our show notes. And so that's our flowers, that's our veggies, and that's our dirt. Dee, we've been a talkative couple of people to this morning.
Yes, we have. We've gone a little over time. We hope you guys don't mind. Just walk on the treadmill or weed a little longer.
Or set this to 1.5 times and then we'll talk really fast.
Oh my goodness, that would be really fast. Okay, you guys can reach us almost anywhere. Email us at thegardenangelus@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram on The Garden Angelus, on Facebook at The Garden Angelus. You can also find us on Twitter at The Garden Angelus. Plus, you can find us individually at Red Dirt Ramblings and also May Dreams Gardens. And then I think you are Indie Gardener on Instagram and Twitter, right?
That's right.
So,
and
yes?
2 more things. If anybody wants to meet us in person, you are going to be at the Denton County Master Gardeners in Texas at their Fall Festival on October the 12th.
I am. I'm going to speak twice.
And I'm going to be in Gibson County, Indiana, down in Princeton on October the 19th. I'll be speaking down there.
And we will have our books for sale, and we will be glad to meet everyone and sign books for you and try to tell you anything that we don't tell you on this podcast.
Yeah, and let you ask a few questions. So with that, Dee, I have loved talking with you over the garden gate.
It has been fab. Talk to you next week.
All right, bye now.
Bye.